looks good. Make sure we're streaming here. That looks good. Good. Very good. Okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome to you all. Welcome also to many students who are attending these classes, satsang I should say, online. We have a lot of questions, so let me apologize in advance if I don't get to your question. Please forgive me. We'll do the best we can. And we'll alternate between online questions and some questions from our local ashram students. So first question here is from Karthik, who writes from India. In your previous videos, you have mentioned that Vedanta alone cannot help us to overcome emotional scars. Yeah. Vedanta is a spiritual teaching. It's not meant to address deep emotional problems. My question is, and further, let me add one more thing. If you have significant emotional problems, they will be an obstacle to your sadhana, to your continued path of spiritual growth, following the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. In technical terms, we say that being emotionally healthy and being emotionally mature is a prerequisite. Shankara uses that term. Adhikaritvam. It's considered a prerequisite for the study of Vedanta. So Karthik's question is, how can we become emotionally mature? And what practices can we do to improve our emotional maturity? Well, these are questions really not for a Vedanta teacher, but for someone who teaches maybe psychology or something. There is, on the other hand, a lot of helpful psychological teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. It's not a text on psychology, but there's lots of helpful teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. But if someone has severe or significant emotional problems, then there are plenty of times when a therapist becomes necessary. Just as I am an expert, so to speak, a so-called expert in solving spiritual problems, a therapist is an expert in solving emotional problems. If you want help, do you try to figure out things by yourself, or do you go to an expert? You could try to figure out this Advaita Vedanta on your own. Good luck. Or you could try to solve all your deep emotional problems, if you have any, on your own. Again, good luck. Why not make use of resources that are available? Next question comes from a group of followers at Gulmohar Orchid Society in Pune. Orchids are flowers. I guess it's kind of a special flower. I presume this is a group. Anyway, I have no idea. Anyway, interesting question. As per Dvaita and the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, the Sampradaya of Vishishtadvaita, these are the teachings of Ramanuja and his followers. According to them, after achieving moksha, the jiva will go to do devotional service to Lord Vishnu in his abode Vaikuntha Loka. But moksha, as per Advaita Vedanta, is a state in which the jiva is liberated from suffering and rebirth. But this is difficult to comprehend, the experience when the individual identification of body and mind is totally gone, and jiva attains moksha. Could you please elaborate on this? Well, the question asks for a comparison of these two different schools of thought. The school of thought of Ramanuja, called Vishishtadvaita, and the school of thought of Shankaracharya, known as Advaita Vedanta. There are others as well. And I find in general it's not helpful to get into very detailed discussions. Who's right, who's wrong. This kind of discussion is never helpful. We can make one observation, however, and that is the teachings of Ramanuja depend that you have to believe that there is an abode called Vaikuntha in which Lord Vishnu dwells, and you have to believe that after you gain moksha, you will go there. There is no way to demonstrate the truth of these statements. They are non-verifiable statements. I'm not saying they're wrong. Did I say they're wrong? I didn't say they're wrong. I said they are non-verifiable. As opposed to what Shankara teaches about moksha, which is verifiable. Now, at least part of it is verifiable. You can gain freedom from suffering now. That part is verifiable. Shankara also goes on to say that you won't get reborn. That part is non-verifiable, we admit. But here's the point. That is, moksha, as defined by Shankara, is really freedom now, which is a verifiable truth. And moksha, as defined by Ramanuja, is after you die, going to Vaikuntha Loka. And that is non-verifiable. Notice, I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. One is verifiable, the other is not verifiable. If you ask which one, some people, which one should I follow? How can I tell you? First of all, I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm a teacher of Advaita Vedanta. So if I'm going to encourage you at all, it's going to be towards Shankara's teachings. But generally, I wouldn't even do that, because suppose you meaning whoever you may happen to be, suppose a person has a deep emotional commitment to this Vishishtadvaita, the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. In India, especially South India, people grow up in a family in which they are highly identified as being part of this Sri Sampradaya, or Vaishnava Sampradaya. And growing up in a very devout family, there can be a very deep emotional connection to that particular Sampradaya, the Sampradaya of Ramanuja. And here's the problem. If you happen to have grown up in that devout Vaishnava family, and you are highly identified with that Sampradaya as being the highest truth, and then if Swami Tadatmananda says, oh, you should really set that aside and study Advaita Vedanta, it'll hurt your feelings. And so I won't say that. In fact, what I would say is, if you are emotionally committed to this Vaishnava Sampradaya, for you, that's the best. If you are emotionally committed to Madhva's teachings, or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, or whoever's teachings, if you are deeply emotionally committed, you have a deep emotional attachment, let me say, for that particular lineage, who am I to disturb you by trying to redirect you to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta? I have no interest in doing so. I want what's loka kalyana. You always want the best for somebody. You don't want to hurt them, and especially as a sadhu, as a sannyasi, you don't want to cause any problems. And even Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says this in a manner of speaking. He says, buddhi bhedam na janayet. So if somebody has a particular point of view, don't try to, the American expression, strong arm them, twist their arm and try to convince them. Even though I am a teacher of Advaita Vedanta, I have no vested interest. And nor would I say Advaita, I would say Advaita Vedanta works. Without doubt, I can tell you that it works. But I won't say you should give up whatever you're following and take to Advaita Vedanta instead. To me, such statements are not helpful. In some situations, they can be harmful. They can cause hurt. They're unnecessary. Okay, enough said. Then, next question from Jayant. There was a question last week. Is it possible to bribe Ishvara through your prayers? Or actually, a better example of bribing Ishvara is you go to the temple and you say, oh, please give me this, please give me that. This is a typical prayer. And then you end, and after you're done praying, then you put money in the hundi. That's the bakshish, right? I'm being facetious, obviously, and we said in last week's class, Ishvara is not like a human being. We have to grow up and stop superimposing human traits on the God of the cosmos. You have to grow up. Okay. But then, so his question is, but then, how were their ancient people successful in getting what they desire by performing rituals such as yajna? There were certain rituals which were meant to have specific results. There was such a thing as putra kameshti, a ritual that you do for the birth of a son. Now, did it actually work? I have no idea. I didn't live in those days, but I have a feeling if there were a scientific double-blind study done on putra kameshti today, I have a feeling it would be difficult to prove the efficacy of that ritual. I'm not saying it didn't work in ancient times, I have no idea. But in modern times, with our modern scientific knowledge, we have a little better idea about how sons and daughters are born. And they didn't understand all the details of biology in those ancient times. So the Vedas contain descriptions of particular rituals which have particular results, but this is not bribing Ishvara. And let's make a distinction. The efficacy of the ritual doesn't depend on paying off Ishvara. The idea is, I'll be facetious again, Ishvara loves ghee. So therefore, the more ghee you pour into that ritual fire, the happier Ishvara becomes. This is back to that silly, we called it last week, anthropomorphic thinking, superimposing human traits on Ishvara, so we have to give that up. According to the ancient rishis, certain practices had results that were caused according to the laws of karma. These rituals functioned according to the laws of karma. That is, they believed that doing this ritual in this particular way with these mantras and doing all the right things, that karmically this ritual would produce the birth of a son or some other results. So the ancient view of these rituals was that they worked not by paying off Ishvara, but they worked according to the laws of karma. One more question here. This is Yogi writing from Glasgow, Scotland. Jayant was writing from Raipur. And so this is Yogi from Scotland. Why do enlightened beings often avoid directly stating that they are enlightened, or seem hesitant to discuss it? Well, part of it is common sense. Somebody who has a big neon sign, I am enlightened, doesn't that set off some warning signs for you? Or where is the necessity to advertise that you are enlightened? Presumably, whatever you say should demonstrate the efficacy of those teachings. It doesn't depend on promoting is a little side topic, but sometimes there's a lot of effort to promote the individual, and that can be deeply problematic, because this thing, it is a thing after all, body and mind, this thing is merely the container. And what's important is not the container, but what's inside. When you buy a box of macaroni and cheese. So is it the box that's important, or the mac and cheese inside? You don't put the box in the pot. You empty the contents into the pot and you throw the box away. In fact, this thing will be thrown away before long, another 10, 20 years, and we throw this one away because it's used up. It's no longer serving its role as a container. So let's differentiate between the container and the contents. Now, back to Yogi's questions. Why are they often reluctant to say, I am enlightened? When you get enlightened, you discover, I can't say, not that it's no big deal, but we get a really funny idea about enlightenment being some kind of exalted state. That's a very common concept. Being enlightened is an exalted state. Exalted is the problem. If you want to say enlightenment is a state free from suffering, absolutely. But exalted state goes way, way beyond that. And the problem with that, and the reason an enlightened person, if the person is enlightened, they would say, I am free from suffering. They won't say, I've achieved an exalted state. Someone who claims to have achieved, you have to be careful with what I say. Let's try this. Someone who claims to have achieved an exalted state, in my opinion, when I say my opinion means you don't have to agree with me. Someone who has achieved an exalted state, in my opinion, has demonstrated that they're not enlightened. Because enlightenment is not an exalted state. It is a state of freedom from suffering. And opposite of an exalted state, and this is a metaphor I've given before, and really applies here. Enlightenment, as understood through these teachings of Advaita Vedanta, enlightenment is, Shankara says, jnanameva moksha. That knowledge is that which removes ignorance, that so-called veil of ignorance covering your true self. So we could restate it, and that is to say that enlightenment is the destruction of ignorance. Shankara uses positive terms, jnanameva moksha, but we can put it in negative terms. Enlightenment is the destruction of ignorance about your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. That being so, getting rid of ignorance is not something to be proud of. It's like the metaphor, this is a stinking metaphor I've used before. When you take your garbage out from your kitchen and take it to the bin outside, are you proud of yourself? Not a matter of pride. And I'll just add one more thing, and then we'll take some local questions here next. One more thing to add. Let me just check this while I'm thinking about it. Looks okay. Okay, good. So, that moment when you can finally say, I am enlightened, instead of being an ecstatic moment of recognizing some exalted state, it's more like, why didn't I get that before? It's so obvious. It's so obvious. How could I have been such a blockhead? I've been told this for years and years. I've been reading this. My guru has been telling me this for years and years. Why didn't I get it long ago? I think that's a far more accurate way of understanding enlightenment, not this exalted state business. Okay, shall we take some local questions? A question here, you'll need the microphone.
So, some traditions say, like God being the all-doer type of thing, right?
God being?
The all-doer.
The all-doer, okay.
And so, that
Vedanta
doesn't mean...
doesn't say that, by the way, but...
Yeah, so, I mean, it means that, like, if that was true, then there would be no free will.
Right.
But the thing is that, like, suppose I have the thought right now to move my hand, right? Where does that thought come from, though? It comes from the mind, which comes from Ishvara, though.
So Ishvara created a brain and mind that happens to have free will.
Okay. That's just, okay.
It's really, that's all it is.
Okay.
It's like Ishvara created a world that has randomness. Everything that happens in the world is not predetermined in any sense, not scientifically predetermined, and not karmically predestined. There is such a thing as randomness in the world. That's part of the world created by Ishvara. Just as randomness is part of the created world, so is free will part of the created world.
But the thing is that if there's no divine plan, though, right? Then, like, what was the chance of you meeting Pujya Swami Dayananda Ji? Like, the thing is that, wasn't it kind of like part of your karmas, though, in that sense, and that's why it all happened? Wasn't not a plan?
We can't answer questions like that.
Okay.
Because that assumes that we can figure everything out. You're back to that deterministic universe.
Okay.
In a deterministic universe, there's no free will and there's no randomness. The moment you acknowledge that the universe has randomness and has free will, you can't figure things like that out. Yeah. You can't figure out randomness. And free will, by definition, is free, which means it could be like this, it could be like that. So don't try to, they use the term reductionistic thinking, where we try to reduce. And this is an important point, a more general point, where a very common error in thinking is where we try to reduce the complexity of the world in which we live to something that's really simple. In fact, oversimplified. We all have a tendency to do that. And the truth of the matter is, we live in a spectacularly complex world. Our lives are spectacularly complex. And to expect that we can figure everything out is just naive. So we need to understand, cope with that complexity. Other questions here? You'll need the microphone.
Swamiji, today's topic was quite complex, right? You're talking about mind and consciousness. So you said that mind to mind exists because of consciousness or something to that effect. That mind, to see the mind.
I said there's no mind
Without
without
consciousness. Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the inverse is also true, right?
Why?
So consciousness, to say that, that we are conscious, and a corollary of that is that, it's the same consciousness that pervades, you and me, right? But that seems to be an intellectual construct.
Why?
Because it's not that I wake up in the morning and I suddenly feel that, this is all consciousness.
When you wake up in the morning, are you conscious?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, that's it.
Right, but the corollary of that, right, the next point, which is that you are also conscious and you and I are the same consciousness, right? That doesn't seem to be self-evident or self-effulgent, right? That seems to be an intellectual.
Here's a Vedantic approach to that question. And let me try to formulate it a little bit more exactly. Do you need Vedanta to know that you're conscious? No. That consciousness happens to be boundaryless. The consciousness which is present in your experience right now, is this working? Yeah. The consciousness present in your experience right now happens to have no edge or boundary. If it has no edge or boundary, then necessarily there is one consciousness present in us all. You with me so far? Sure. That's just simple logic. Consciousness having no edge or boundary is the one and the same consciousness in us all. The problem is that you have wrong assumptions about that consciousness. You may assume that consciousness is somehow stuck inside of your head or stuck inside of your body. These are wrong conclusions. You have misunderstood the nature of your consciousness. Your consciousness is already boundaryless, but you've made wrong conclusions. Those wrong conclusions are in your mind. Vedanta solves the problem by addressing the wrong conclusions in your mind, and full stop, done. In other words, Vedanta doesn't need to tell you consciousness is all pervasive. What Vedanta does is remove your wrong notions about consciousness, and especially the idea that consciousness is somehow stuck inside the body or mind. I'm not sure, have I answered your question?
I mean, partially, right, Swamiji? Because
rephrase it, please.
Yeah, it's like this, right? In my mind, these things should be simple, right? They should be easily understand. It should be part of our experience.
What
right?
things should be simple?
These truths, right? So,
These
for example,
truths.
let me
We're
take an
talking
example.
about one truth. Let's just stay focused.
Yes.
So, our one truth is that your consciousness is not stuck inside your body. Just stay with that.
Okay, right. But to then extend that, right? Even that.
Don't extend it. Stay with it, please.
Okay.
Otherwise, our conversation won't be focused.
Right. So the point that you're making, that that consciousness is it has no edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is an intellectual construct.
Prove to me that there's an edge.
But prove to me that there is not an edge.
In deep sleep, do you feel an edge?
You don't, but deep sleep.
That's my proof.
But in deep sleep.
That's Vedanta's proof. In deep sleep, consciousness exists, and there's no edge.
But how do we know consciousness exists in deep sleep?
we just went through that.
Right. No, because
so that was in our class.
Yeah. So
when we said that the question is invalid. Remember that discussion?
Correct.
Okay, so knowing that your question is invalid, rephrase it, please.
Let me take another analogy, for example.
No, stay with the same.
No, I am.
We will lose our track.
Right.
So your consciousness, you have the wrong thought. let me try to pull this together. Your contention is that Vedanta is intellectual, and that the mind is needed to gain this Vedantic knowledge, which is not at all what Vedanta says. Vedanta says that Vedanta, meaning the teachings of the ancient rishis, say that your consciousness is already Brahman. That's what it says. What you think is limited, finite, stuck inside your head and body and subject to all kinds of suffering, you're wrong. You've made lots of wrong conclusions. You have misinterpreted your experience of being a human being. And this is a favorite topic we've discussed many times here. We are all really good at misinterpreting our experiences. And the example I've given so many times is the fact that you have never yet seen the sun go down. The sun doesn't go down, your turns. But we're all pretty good at making that misunderstanding. So what Vedanta does is merely, and I'm using that word deliberately, merely removing wrong conclusions. When wrong conclusions are removed, you remain as you truly are. Further knowledge is not necessary. I'll say that again. This is the answer to your question. When all the wrong conclusions are removed, what's left? You. You minus your wrong conclusions, you minus your suffering, you minus everything. And the you that remains is boundaryless, limitless, unborn, uncreated, unaffected by worldly suffering. So I think that answers your question. Good. Okay. Okay, one more question. You'll need the microphone.
The same question.
Yes, please.
My understanding until now was first I have to know that I am Atma.
Right.
And then I have to know, this is my understanding and is partly removed by this question answer. And the second step, so it is a self-realization is in two steps. The first step is to know that I am that Atma. And second step is to know that Atma is everywhere. That means it is Vyapak.
Atma is Brahman.
Yeah. So
Correct.
these are two-step realizations.
Yeah,
and two different methods for that.
One big method that addresses both issues.
No, I mean the first one, to know that I am Atma, is Vyatirek method. And to know that it is all over is a Anvay method.
Those terms are not used by Shankara in this context. So there are two aspects. One aspect is Atma Vichara, which self-inquiry, which culminates in discovery of your true nature. There's another aspect, which is, we can say that the inquiry has two directions. This is a more accurate way of describing it. The first direction is within. Who am I? And that inward-turned inquiry culminates in the discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda. The second inquiry is outwards. And in that inquiry, you discover that the only thing that's out there is the same as, as what's in here. So we say that Vedanta is one teaching, but we can say there are two directions to that inquiry.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice question. Okay, let's take some more online questions. Next question from Sajit, who lives in Dubai. Sajid asks, what's the difference between an enlightened person and Ishvara, who is incarnated on earth? Difference between an enlightened person and an avatara. Okay? An enlightened person is still a person, a human being who was born because of karma. being enlightened, we presume that they have broken free from karma, but while they're alive, that enlightened person is still subject to the laws of karma. Do enlightened people get hungry, sleepy? Of course, let's not be silly. So an enlightened person is still subject to the laws of karma. An enlightened person born due to karma and subject to the laws of karma until death. Then the avatara is a special projection of Ishvara himself into the world with some kind of form, human form or otherwise, and that form is not bound by the laws of karma. That form is Avatara Vada, the teaching of who and what is an avatara, is really quite a complex topic. I'd like to avoid it right now because it'll take a long time. So let's just say that an incarnation of Ishvara, like in the form of Sri Krishna, is not born of... Krishna was not born due to karma. Krishna was not born to his individual karma. Unlike an enlightened person who is born due to individual karma, an avatara is not born due to individual karma. There's a lot more that could be said here. I think maybe this isn't the right time for that discussion. Okay, next from Shobha. Shobha lives in Oregon. She writes, Swami Vivekananda gave inspiring talks on how Vedanta can help us be self-confident and fearless. I'm actually sitting here because of Swami Vivekananda's books. And in particular, his book, Jnana Yoga. Actually, these books, as I understand, were edited from his public discourses, his lectures. Anyway, the one book called Jnana Yoga really put me on this path and helped me tremendously. Now, he spoke on being self-confident and fearless. Can you please expand on this? Does this teaching apply to regular people only, or only to enlightened people? Well, Swami Vivekananda was teaching enlightened people? Okay. And it's really important to understand Swami Vivekananda's teachings in context. And in context, he was speaking at a time of a kind of a cultural and religious revival that was really burning brightly in Bengal at the end of the 19th century. And what this revival was about is people living in India, Hindus in India, were getting sick and tired of the British Raj and the effects of the British Raj, British rule, to control the way people thought. And there was the thinking, anyway, a little complicated. I want to take more questions. So to keep it simple, Swami Vivekananda's emphasis on being confident and fearless were not due to Vedanta, but more due to the cultural context. Generally, when Advaita Vedanta is taught, there's not a tremendous emphasis on being self-confident. Being self-confident is good. It's a good trait, but that's kind of a psychological trait, being self-confident. Be proud of yourself. Well, that was an important message for Bengalis and others to hear in the late 19th century. Be proud of yourself. Because sadly, there was too much thinking that the British are great and Indians are not so great. That's the problem of colonialism. I'm not excusing it. It's a problem. So what Swami Vivekananda was doing was, he was a Vedantin and he was teaching Vedanta, but he included other teachings which were appropriate to his time and place, as every teacher does. Certainly, I use many modern examples from modern culture, so every teacher does that. Next question from Sai. Sai lives in Gainesville, Florida. I hope you did okay with that terrible hurricane. I don't know where Gainesville is exactly. Sai asks, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? And it depends on how you define these two terms, and people define them in all different ways. A definition that I find particularly helpful is that religion is based on faith, and spirituality is based on knowledge, wisdom, and especially wisdom of the ancient rishis. So to me, that's a very important distinction, and that is what is spirituality in a Vedantic sense is not a matter of faith. And what is religion in terms of all these various beliefs, the fact that it's all a matter of belief, and as I said before, non-verifiable. The fact that they are non-verifiable beliefs, we would then distinguish that to be part of religion and not part of spirituality. Second part of his question, what is the difference between Maya and reality? The difference between Maya and reality is like the difference between clay and pot. Easy. Not so easy. That's a very superficial, and how can one tell the difference between what is false and what is real? You see a pot, you know the pot exists because of clay. You see the world is not absolutely real because the pot comes and goes, the world comes and goes. That which comes and goes is not absolutely real. You know the pot exists because of an underlying reality. We know the world exists because of an underlying reality, a reality we usually call Brahman. Okay, question here from Raja Gopalan, who lives in Chennai. In our last satsang, we used the example of space to explain the concept of Jivatma and Paramatma. The example, by the way, just to set the context, Jivatma is like the space inside this pot, and Paramatma is like the space everywhere. What's the relationship between them? Just one space. By the way, Jivatma, does all pervasive space, is it excluded from the pot by the walls of the pot? It's just, in fact, on analysis, there's only Paramatma. There is no Jivatma. Jivatma is, won't call it an illusion, let's call it an experience. You experience pot space, but there's only one space. You experience being an individual conscious being, but there is in fact one all-pervasive consciousness. So that being so, there are so many, this is Raja Gopalan's question, so many similarities between space and Brahman. They are both infinite, all-pervasive. Please explain how Brahman is beyond both space and time. So when we use space as a metaphor, but then we say Brahman is beyond space. That's, first of all, space is a metaphor, and metaphors are never identical with what they represent. Metaphors always have limitations. And the limitation of the metaphor of space is that space is created. Before, even scientists admit, before the Big Bang, what we understand as space didn't exist. Same from the Hindu perspective. Before Srishti, before the manifestation of this universe, space and time did not exist. Brahman existed, space and time itself go through cycles of manifestation and dissolution. Okay, another question here from Mickey. Doesn't say where he lives. In fact, relates to this. In a previous satsang, we mentioned that Ishvara always remains, whether or not the world is manifest or unmanifest. Ishvara always remains. I understand, this is Mickey's speaking here, I understand Ishvara to be Brahman accompanied by Maya Shakti, which is our definition of Ishvara, by the way. And so it is Ishvara who manifests as this world. I thought Ishvara was a manifest state. So I just want to understand if Ishvara has both a manifest and unmanifest state. I'm afraid there's a misunderstanding of Ishvara. So Ishvara is Brahman plus Maya Shakti. That's our definition of Ishvara. Maya Shakti doesn't come and go. Maya Shakti is eternal. There is a manifestation of the universe and a dissolution of the universe, but Brahman remains, Maya Shakti remains, universe may not remain, but if Brahman and Maya Shakti both remain, that's Ishvara. Ishvara remains. Ishvara does not become unmanifest. Okay. Then what would be Ishvara in the absence of the world? Ishvara remains. What is unmanifest Ishvara? No such thing. Okay, so enough said. Another question from Amit. Amit is writing from India with regard to the question, what is the purpose of life? Some say there is no purpose. What are they? I'm trying to remember the Sanskrit equivalent of eat, drink, and be merry. And it's anyway, Ghritam pibet, jivam nayet. That might not be exact. The Ghritam pibet is correct. The other part I'm not sure about. Jivam nayet, live your life, Ghritam pibet, by drinking ghee. Now, it's contextual. In ancient times, but we forget this stuff. In ancient times, getting enough calories in your diet was a problem. And we take it for granted. So, in fact, today we've got the other problem. We've got too many calories in our diets. But that's the idea. In ancient times, ghritam, which is ghee, this clarified butter, was considered the best product for your health. In spite of the fact that it clogs your calories, your arteries, and gives you too much body fat. So, but that's the equivalent of eat, drink, and be merry. Some people say that everyone's purpose is to find their respective purpose in life and give meaning to their life. And these are two different statements. To find their purpose and give their own meaning to life. Those are two different things. You can find your purpose if it already exists. It doesn't. Or you can give purpose, meaning, to your life. You can do that. As per Vedantic teachings, it seems that living dharmically and attaining moksha is a purpose. So is there any specific purpose, and is it up to us to define it? Animals, plants just live. It's a big, important question, so we can presume that the ancient rishis addressed it. And they did. So instead of speculating about the purpose of life, it would make sense to find out, how did the ancient rishis look upon the purpose of life? Many of you know that the rishis defined life in a fourfold way, which they defined as dharma, artha, kama, moksha. They said there are 4 primary goals of life. I'll take them in a different order. The first goal of life, they said, is kama, pleasure, to enjoy the blessings that we've been given. But kama alone can't be the goal of life, otherwise you're back to that guratam bribed. So there has to be more to life than drinking ghee. So therefore, artha is another goal. It's wealth and security for the future. Think of it in this way. Kama is pleasure now. This is an analysis of these four goals. They're called chatur purushartha. Four purusharthas, four goals of life. And here's an analysis which I think you'll find very helpful. So the common order is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. I'm going to change the order. First, kama, pleasure now. Let me say contentment. Contentment now. Artha, future. Whatever you need for being content for the rest of your life. That's a valid goal of life. Enjoying your life today is a valid goal of life, but does that mean spend your life savings and enjoy everything today? What about tomorrow? So obviously, you need to take care of yourself tomorrow as well. That is the second of these goals, expressed as the word artha, has many meanings. The next, dharma. Dharma in this context means the accumulation of good karma and avoiding the so-called bad karma. And the purpose of this, if kama is contentment now, if artha is contentment for the rest of your life, dharma is contentment in whatever follows this life. This is a very important analysis. In each case, contentment. Kama, pleasure, enjoyment now. Artha, wealth, enjoyment for the rest of this life. Dharma, following dharma for the sake of a life of contentment in the next life. And then finally, moksha. Notice that 1, 2, and 3 are all about contentment. So is 4. Moksha is discovering that your contentment doesn't depend on pleasure. Your contentment doesn't depend on wealth. Your contentment doesn't depend on going to some heavenly abode or having a better rebirth. Your contentment depends on discovering your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, that so-called inner divinity. So these are the 4 goals of life. Did God have any purpose for creation? If you say, why did God create things? God is, again, don't superimpose human traits on Ishvara. You get up this morning and you decide what you're going to do. Does Ishvara decide like that? Should I do this, or should I create an earthquake in this part of Earth, or should I do a flood over here? Silliness. So Ishvara is best understood as karma paladata, the intelligent cosmic being who ensures that karmas play out, that the results of past karmas fructify in their appropriate results. If this is just his leela, then is it safe to assume that there's no real purpose in anything? This idea of leela is really contrary to what the ancient rishis taught. It is taught in some Puranas, but it's not exactly what the ancient rishis said. Leela means play. God is in a playful mood, which is why 50 people died in that hurricane that hit this country a few days ago. That's play? That's a playful mood? Come on. That's not an appropriate way of understanding Ishvara. Whatever happens, happens according to karma, both the karmas you intentionally commit and the results of your past karmas, both. So this idea of Leela is not exactly correct. Let's pause. Other questions here before we continue? In back, you'll need the microphone, please.
Swamiji, I started following the spiritual teachings like 10 years ago. And I have felt a lot of benefits from this. I feel much calmer, happier, more content. But now I wish, I had started this journey much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your advice? When should people begin this spiritual journey? Does it require some maturity, some age?
That's it. If you take the microphone. When you were 20 years old, suppose you heard me. I was teaching 20 years ago. And suppose I said, you really should study this Vedanta. Actually, when you were 20, sorry, I misspoke. I think we're about the same age, so I wasn't teaching at the age of 20. But when you were 20, if some spiritual teacher said you should study Advaita Vedanta, you would say, what for? Right? Absolutely. So you correctly said, we have to be mature enough to two things. One is to, and the crucial one here, is to understand the limitations of what we can accomplish through worldly pursuits. And it takes some time to figure it out. Some people figure it out sooner, some people figure it out later, but rather later than not at all. is the point. And then having discovered the limitations of what we can accomplish through worldly pursuits, then we become receptive to the teachings of Vedanta. So it's unique for every person when we discover the limitations of what we can achieve through worldly life. And let's acknowledge the fact that the vast majority of people never figure that out. They're always chasing after the next thing. When do they stop chasing? When they fall over. But look at this, they're chasing contentment. Chasing contentment in worldly life is like chasing the horizon. When will you reach the horizon? Well, you fall over before you reach the horizon. And this is the truth for the vast majority of people. Okay, one more question here. Did you have a question, Ron? No. Okay. Okay, we'll take your question. You need the microphone.
Is it incorrect to say that the goal of achieving enlightenment is a moving goal or a moving target? And I'm asking that because if we have to lessen suffering, it also implies you remove yourself from samsara bandhana. So you can keep on extending that. So is it?
No, it's not it's not gradual in that way. I think that's what you're implying, right? Is that it's gradual. The enlightenment is discovering your true nature to be full and complete now, utterly not dependent on anything else. That's not a moving target. Removing problems from our life that's what we just described. That is certainly a moving target. Have you noticed, you solve one problem, then there's another, and another, and another. Or you fulfill one desire, and then there's another, and another, and another. Those are definitely moving targets. But in Advaita Vedanta, the solution is not to solve all your problems. The solution is not to fulfill all your desires. but to discover that you're okay. I like the simple American English. You are okay in spite of your problems. You are okay in spite of your unfulfilled desires. And that's not a moving goal. Let's just take a few more questions online and then we'll conclude. This question from Ayaz. Question is in Melbourne, Australia. Question is, mind is required for any experience. Correct. How can one experience anything if the mind doesn't exist after death? Correct. When you're dead, you experience nothing. No problem. Whose mind experiences bliss in moksha? Well, wait a minute. Who said that moksha is an experience of bliss? Moksha is freedom. Freedom from. This is a very common misunderstanding. When you get moksha, you don't get anything. Moksha means freedom, freedom from. So moksha is freedom from suffering while you're alive. It's also freedom from suffering in future lifetimes, so there's no rebirth, freedom from rebirth. So no suffering and no rebirth. Who said it's a continual? I think the implication or the assumption is that moksha is a continual experience of bliss. First of all, if moksha were a continuous experience of bliss, I suppose I would be sitting here blissed out and unable to teach. No, it's not a continual experience of bliss in this life or afterlife. And continuing with that question, how is the concept of moksha after death in Vedanta? As I just said, moksha after death means not getting born again and undergoing suffering. Permanent freedom from suffering. Now, some people say, no experience? And some people find that frightening. I get that. If I say that after death, there will be no experience. So, oh, no experience. What would that be like? No, what it would be like is dreamless sleep. In dreamless sleep, you have no experience. How terrible is that? How significant that we love dreamless sleep. So what is there? It's a state of perfect contentment, perfect peace. No problem. All right, maybe we'll make this our... Let's take one more question here. Okay. Let me just choose. Maybe two questions, quickly. First question, how does the sukshma sharira get associated with the fetus in a mother's body? There are two answers to that. One is from the ancient worldview and from a modern worldview. From an ancient worldview, there's this amazing story told in some Upanishad, I'm not sure where it says that the sukshma sharira is up in the clouds, and when it rains, it comes down in a raindrop. That raindrop goes into the earth, gets drawn up into a plant. And that plant is eaten by a man. Ends up in the semen. And when the semen joins the egg, then we have the sukshma sharira present in the fetus. That's a pre-scientific ancient worldview. From a modern worldview, we would say that sukshma sharira is not in a particular place at a particular time. It has no physical form. If it has no physical form, what is there to prevent it from being present in the fetus. So, and to explain further, there's no scientific way of investigating all of that. Okay, one last question. There's a question from Rishi Ganesh, who lives in Malaysia. Question about how to use Vedanta as a pramana, as a means of knowledge. And he says, do I have to learn Sanskrit? No. Do I have to read and interpret scriptures and commentary directly? No. That's the purpose of a teacher. The guru has to break his or her head and learn Sanskrit properly and do all of this. And if your guru is doing that for you, you don't have to break your head. Do I have to meditate and compare my experiences and conclusions with what were written in the Vedas? No. Do I have to ask questions in satsangs till all doubts vanish? No. Sorry, I'm being a little silly here. Because using Vedanta as a pramana is a very simple feature of Vedanta. And it's simply this: to use these teachings to guide a process of self-inquiry. That's it. Don't need to say anything more. If you are listening to Vedanta to understand what the rishis said, to understand what Shankaracharya says, to understand what this text says, to understand what this text says, if that is your orientation, you are not using Vedanta correctly. You are collecting information. You are not using Vedanta as a pramana. So very simply, these teachings are meant to guide you in a personal practice of self-inquiry, Atma Vichara. To undergo that process of Atma Vichara, guided by the teachings of Vedanta, is to use Vedanta as a pramana. Do you need to know Sanskrit to do that? No. Do you need to do comparative analysis of different texts? No. Do you need to compare your experiences in meditation to this or that? No. It's all about self-inquiry. Very good. Nice questions. And again, I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions. There are many left. We'll conclude the prayer. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya Mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om. That's it. See you.